we are.
There we go.
Okay, Mr. Green. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the April 29th, 2019 Mayor Commission Workshop. Commissioners, how are you?
Thank you.
We have one item, violence in Northwest Neighborhood and homicide clear rates. Commissioner Peduzzi, you want to tee this up for us?
Thank you, Mayor. Certainly, I think this is one of the biggest issues that we are charged with dealing with, obviously in conjunction with our city departments. Violence in our neighborhoods, and especially it seems like it's concentrated in our northwest neighborhoods. You know, just this weekend we saw, you know, a number of different incidences involving firearms and gunshots, and I believe that there was at least 2 people killed this weekend alone. You know, I'm really not here this morning, contrary to what some people may believe, to point fingers. We need to come together as a community and figure out what we can do to solve this problem so that we don't have another member of our community senselessly gunned down. You know, this has got to end. When I was on the campaign trail, it's what I heard over and over and over. It's, you know, violence was one of the top 3 things that all of us, you know, have heard in the last year. And I promised my constituents that I would do everything in my power to make sure that their concerns were heard. And as I said, I'm not here to point fingers, but we've got to do something. We've got to figure out where the disconnect is and figure out how we can address this problem. Is it that we don't have the resources that we need in our police department? Is it the way we're going about policing? I'm not sure what it is, and I'm hoping to start a dialogue so we could figure out how to solve this problem together.
Okay, great. I see the chief is there. Chief Mooney, do you want to begin this discussion?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I was just notified on Friday that we were going to do this presentation regarding clearance rates on violent crime in the city. There wasn't a whole lot of information with it, so basically what I'm going to do is give you an overview of the situation in the city as it stands now, a little bit of the historical with it, some of the long-term initiatives that we've started over the past couple of years in conjunction with other members of the city and groups in the city. In addition, I have a representative from the state attorney's office here to explain some of the hurdles and issues that go into prosecuting cases to be able to get to those clearance rates. I have our Detective Sergeant Hardiman here also to explain some of the current cases that we have in the city and where we're actually at with it. Because sometimes as you look at statistics, they don't really tell the whole story. And as I have up on the board right now, I don't have the PowerPoints in your packet that I gave you. I basically gave you a packet of the historical on homicides in the city, and then in addition, the Mayor's Village Initiative, which is something that we've been working on with Kevin Jones over the past 2 years, trying to come up with a comprehensive plan to address the roots of violence in the community and to try to come up with a long-term plan so that we don't have today's 7-year-olds turning into 10 years from now 17-year-old shooters or murder victims. So that's one of the most comprehensive things that we've been doing to address the issues in the community is getting into the community, getting involved in the community. With that being said, the Uniform Crime Report, as we submitted it this year, shows that our overall crime rate index is actually down 16.6%, but that's primarily in our property crimes. It's kind of self-explanatory as you look at the numbers. We are up slightly in violent crimes, which is also the trend nationwide right now. So I'm not saying that that's a reason to say that's why it's up, but I can tell you that since October, when we instituted the Real-Time Crime Center, those numbers have been down, and if you compare them October 2017 to October 2018, in the same time period, our numbers are actually down. We do have some violent crimes that occur in those primarily economically challenged neighborhoods. Historically, you'll see there's a chart in the back of the packet I gave you that goes all the way back to the 80s in regard to homicides. So this is not something that just occurred in the city. And it is something that we've worked on for years and years and years to try to drive those numbers down. But if you look at the overall statistics, our crime rate is actually down. In the north end, just comparison 2018 to 2019, as of the beginning of April, this shows through March because we haven't finished March yet, finished April yet. Our overall crime rate in the north end is down almost 11%. The 2 homicides that occurred over the weekend, obviously that's gonna put a spike in our numbers for the year to date. I don't have the year to date from last year, so I'm not sure if I'm pretty sure we're right about the same as we were last year with that. But some of the other incidences that we were concerned with have gone down slightly, primarily aggravated assaults, which typically involve firearms incidences. This is a 2017 to 2019 comparison on our Part 1 crimes in the north end of the city. We're still on a downward trend in 2019 as of the end of last month. As I said before, one of the primary things that we've done over the past couple of years was to try to really boost up our long-term efforts to make an impact on an incident or a crisis that we have had for years and years and years in the city. We have more community outreach programs now stemming from 6-year-olds who are starting Boy Scouts and Cub Scout troops with police officers and firefighters running the camps, to kids in the elementary schools being taught by our officers, the GREAT program, 3rd graders being read to, having lunch with police officers in their schools to try to build community relations with those kids so that they don't fear the police, so that they will trust the police and potentially make a larger impact down the road when they get a little bit older. We have programs at the grade school level, the elementary school level, the high school level, in addition to some that we deal with kids that get arrested and try to give them a second chance, whether it's felonies or misdemeanors. We have outreach programs where we have officers going out with mental health workers, DCF, other social service providers to try to get to the root of the problem, not just the incident itself, but trying to make an impact before we turn into another generation of victims. In regard to the Real-Time Crime Center, I told you we got that going in October of this year. It's made a tremendous impact in our ability to collect evidence, have leads on cases, to direct patrols to certain areas where we are predicting that something's going to happen based on something more than just a gut instinct. Our numbers have been down on incidences since October when this started with just the shot spotter. Our license plate reader technology, in addition to our camera system citywide, has been improving since October. We're still not 100% operational on the initial purchases from the Real-Time Crime Center. So about 6 months in, we've definitely seen the advantage of having that center and the different things that we can pull out of that has impacted the way we're deploying our units. I'll tell you the initial things that we look for, as you look on the left side of the chart, is our community concerns. Obviously, drugs and speeders, prostitution and homelessness. That's one of the things that we have to deal with the core issues there before they become something more violent. The statistics that we're getting out of the Real-Time Crime Center allows us to be more predictive in where we're going to put our people and where we can send our tactical units to try to intervene before we have payback shootings. I'm going to have Sergeant Matias, who's one of the sergeants for one of those ITAC teams, which is an intelligence-led tactical unit that actually goes out based on information that they get out of the Real-Time Crime Center from incidences that occurred prior to the day they're going in service in order to try to intervene and make sure that they can either prevent the next one from happening or recover guns and disrupt the incident before it occurs. Obviously, we respond to emergencies. The Real-Time Crime Center is able to zero in on emergencies that occur somewhere near where we have the technology. Now, the technology has not been dispersed citywide. It's been dispersed primarily in the areas that we're talking about where the crime rates have been historically high and continue to be so. But we haven't had enough time yet to see what the true impact is. Like I said, we're about 6 months in, and we still haven't gotten everything completely operational, but for the things that we have been able to use it for, we've seen a lot of successes. When we get incidences that occur and go through the Real-Time Crime Center, and it's not a real-time incident, it's something that there's intelligence where the officers on the tactical level can be given kind of a game plan. They come up with a game plan as far as what they're thinking they're going to try to intervene in before it occurs. Like we have a shooting on Saturday evening, 2 people killed. It's related to some other incidences that we're aware of, and we're involved in actively trying to ensure that we don't have a payback shooting. Those are the things that we're dealing with. This is not something that's isolated in the city. We've got back and forth between us and other jurisdictions. They're dealing with the same thing, and we team up with the PBSO, the local, state, and federal agencies to try to combat these crimes. Riviera, Sheriff's Office on the south end also has similar technology to us. We're sharing information, we're working together and trying to come up with a long-term game plan. This is not just something that you can knee-jerk and all of a sudden it's going to go away. This has been centuries in the making. It's going to take a while to make an impact on it. So we're trying to hit it from all directions, not just the long-term impact, but also the short-term. In regards to the actual deployment of people, I'm going to actually ask Sergeant Matias to come up right now and kind of explain what he does in regard to his unit and the information that he gets from a real-time crime center and how his unit uses that information to deploy each day. And what I will, come on up, Tony. Or would you rather he stays at the seat? It doesn't matter, either way. Come on up. Sergeant Matias is the sergeant on one of the teams that we have. Ultimately, we would like to have a unit exactly like Tony's, 24/7, that covers all of the city, all of the hours of the day, all the days of the week. We're not quite there because the manpower is not all the way up to where it needs to be. So we are almost up to full staffing. We're just shy. We're in single digits for the first time in 10 years. But even when we get those numbers filled, we could still use more in order to expand based on the information we're garnering out of the real-time crime center. So I'm going to let him speak a little bit about what he does, and then we'll move on from there.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'd just like to give you a little bit of my background first to kind of go into how I...
You speak into the mic, please.
I'd just like to give you a little bit of a background on me and to how I go into the approach and how we go into the approach of getting ahead of it in the future. I have 22 years at the West Palm Beach Police Department. 10 of those years were spent in the Criminal Investigations Division, and some of those years were with the Homicide Unit at the time. We have taken an approach of trying to get ahead of the second one and the first one. My unit works closely with a gang unit, with the with the Criminal Investigations Unit, as well as the units that go out in the communities and speak to the children. Unfortunately, children see a lot of this and they hear a lot of this, whether it's in the younger ages, whether it's in the high schools, middle schools, you'd be surprised. We actually have several officers in that unit that can form a bond with these people. I'll show up and they'll pull those officers off to the side. Those officers will give us the information and we can get ahead of it by knowing the previous interactions between the two warring factions or the two warring individuals. Sometimes it'll be ongoing for long terms. Sometimes it'll be something that just sparked up recently, and it could be with a high school, or it could be a school, or just people that are associated in the neighborhoods. Our unit also monitors social media as well as the other units. So as you guys are well aware, everybody's on their phones, and there's so many different avenues of social media out there. We monitor those as well to get ahead of it. I'll speak for a historical one. We had probably 4 warring factions, groups, associates, however you'd like to call that. We identified that 3 of those were having an issue with one source. So we chose to target the one source to eliminate the multiple shootings. We had to figure out a way to go after that person. We chose to do it something as simple as identifying that individual had a suspended driver's license, waiting, doing covert surveillance, waiting for him to get into a car and trying to initiate a traffic stop. Failed to do a traffic stop. From that traffic stop, we wrote PC for felony fleeing. Simply turn on our blue lights, he takes off, we write probable cause from that. That allows us to get an arrest warrant for the individual as well as get a house warrant for the individual. We know him to be armed, we know he flees, we know he's a violent offender. The house warrant and the arrest warrant serve on the house. He's not there, we recover a firearm. Firearms tested, DNA comes back to that individual. He's now looking at 4 to 5 years federally and has already been sentenced. That's just one of the ways we approach it. People don't always see that in the unmarked cars and to see the background of it, but we're out there. Just recently, as you discussed the double homicide, we're very familiar with those individuals and we're very familiar with who they have issues with. the technology allowed us to get ahead of that second one. I don't want to speak for Detective Sergeant Hardiman, but we were able to make an impact in that based on the technology and based on knowing the first one leading into the retaliatory. We used that going into the following day, which was a Sunday. We firmly believe we prevented another shooting by being in the right place at the right time and knowing the individuals that are associated with that. So we try and get ahead of the second one by knowing who the victims are. If we can't prevent that first one, we go into a full out proactive mode to see where that secondary shooting may occur. It's actually, unfortunately, becoming very common that when you have that first shooting, you have that second follow-up. So what we try and do is get ahead of the second one if we can't get ahead of the first one. It actually serves dual purposes by having us out there and doing what we're doing. It also impacts the property-related type crimes, because while we're out there and doing our surveillance and waiting for the potential and the disrupting, if a property crime comes in or something to that effect to the crime center that's in progress, we're usually able there to be in the right spot at the right time to effect an arrest. At that time, our primary focus is violent crimes. So what we'll do is we'll hand that off and then go back into our mode, but it does serve a dual purpose and prevent other crimes as well by having us out there. I'm not sure if we're opening it up for questions. If there's any questions I can go into, I'll answer as many as I can. I just don't want to go into specifics in some part and maybe turning it over to Detective Sergeant Hardiman.
Well, before we do that, Chief, did you have another part of your presentation you want to continue with? And we can.
Yes,
wait till
actually,
you
if we
get through
can.
the whole thing. And
Yeah, if
then
we
we'll
can,
take questions.
maybe have you sit where you have a mic, and then we can maybe do
That's
the
fine.
questions and answers right there. I just wanted to relate a story as far as, I say historically, and that doesn't mean that history can't change. If you understand the history and where we've had issues, that's the only way you can impact it. I'll tell you a story. When I was a patrol officer, that street level type work is where you get to know the guys that are on the same corner every day in and day out, and get to know a little bit about them. And the more familiar you get with them, the better the potential down the road, if something happens, that you're going to have that piece of information that's going to solve that case. I can remember when I was on a team similar to what Sergeant Matthias runs, and we were out on our bicycles every day, and there was one particular individual who hung out in an area where they were selling heroin a lot. He never got arrested for heroin, but he was always on the corner. He had his own business. He had a car detailing business. I can remember one day him stopping and flagging me down and asking me about getting a concealed weapons permit, giving him the way to get it. And he didn't have a history. He didn't have a history, but I knew the guy. A couple weeks later, I find a car that's running on that same street corner. I run the car. It's unattended. I write a ticket to the car. The car's registered to this particular guy. I'd never seen him driving this car before. 3 weeks later, there's a shooting on 6th Street, and there's a gentleman that gets killed on 6th Street. Well, it turns out, several months after that incident, the detectives started coming down to the patrol level to talk to the officers because they were trying to identify a guy that drove that car. I had a card on it. I had a picture of the guy, and I said, yeah, I know that that's his car. I wrote a ticket. We were able to backtrack. This is before you have all this stuff in an electronic format. I know his name, and I said his name, and they said, that's not his name. I said, well, that's what he goes by. Well, that guy owns that car, and the dead guy burglarized that car. And he went to 6th Street, found the guy that burglarized his car, and he killed him for it. Unbeknownst to me, the guy that I had been talking to for over a year on that corner had a total different name, total different identity. It would have never had the pieces put together. It took about 7 years for them to actually track him down because he had a total different identity, and then that case got cleared. So when we look at clearance rates, sometimes it doesn't happen overnight. There's a lot of pieces to the puzzle. There's a lot of things that go into a case for preparation to make sure that you can get a prosecutable case and that you have the information done correctly. It doesn't happen overnight. Our officers and our detectives are working extremely hard to collect the information to put good cases together. And those crime rates that you see, or the clearance rates that you see for last year, very well may go up. But you'll never see them go up because it'll get reported as these cases are made down the road. So to just look at one number for 1 year's worth of crimes, it's not an accurate picture of what's going on. So In regard to some of the things that play into why it takes so long to prosecute a case or put a case together, I asked Assistant State Attorney Brian Fernandez to come in and give you a little bit of the information and what the state requires, what the state's looking for, some of the reasons why cases are left open for so long, instead of just clearing them out and not waiting to find that justice for the families and the victims. We leave them open because it could be one piece of information away for being able to make an arrest. And if we close it and it's on the bookshelf and we're not paying attention to it, who cares if it's cleared if you didn't do it right? So, Mr. Fernandez, if you don't mind coming up.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Once again, I'm Brian Fernandez. I'm one of the assistant state attorneys here at the state attorney's office in Palm Beach County. I'm also a native of Palm Beach County in the city of West Palm Beach. I was asked here to discuss some of our role that we play in the prosecution and investigation of violent crime, specifically with homicide, and how we interact with the police agency here in West Palm Beach. We have a homicide unit that's dedicated specifically to those crimes involving the death of another individual. They work hand in hand with the homicide detectives in the city of West Palm Beach. There are a decent number of hurdles that we can face when we're looking at the investigation into any homicide. Those include the cooperation of witnesses and victims' family, fear of retaliation. Those are the two largest obstacles that we have. Through my history, this is my 20th year of practicing. I've also worked violent gangs, specifically here in Palm Beach County, during the days of putting together racketeering cases and prosecuting large violent gangs throughout the county. Retaliation and fear is one of those concerns that can greatly lengthen an investigation for homicide. We're ever mindful of that when we're working with members in the community, and we're mindful as prosecutors, and of course then detectives are also mindful of that. For us, our standards are we have to have a reasonable likelihood for a successful prosecution. It's much higher than the standard of probable cause. Unfortunately, and I'd say unfortunately because sometimes it can be seen as falling on the department and the detectives, a detective may have probable cause to arrest an individual for a homicide. They work hand in hand with our office, and we'll discuss it, and there are times where even though probable cause may exist, we understand that reasonable likelihood of a successful prosecution and really the future cooperation of those witnesses are not at a level that we're comfortable with going ahead and initiating charges. Because as with any criminal case, and even more importantly with homicide, once we file those criminal charges, we are now on the clock and usually forever barred from potentially going back and refiling or pursuing those charges at a later date. Most of the times we have one shot. And if we're not doing it in the responsible way of incorporating all the evidence we can expect to have and approaching it in a way that we feel garners the best chance of success, then we potentially are facing negative consequences in the most serious of cases in dealing with homicides. Fortunately, there's no statute of limitations with a homicide. That is one issue that we discuss at times because we realize that although right now we may have a level of probable cause, there is a chance, and a decent chance at times, that we may develop more evidence as tempers reduce, as individuals go to prison and then provide cooperation to us, as members of the community start to feel safer. And because of that, we understand that we do at times have a potential chance of having a more successful prosecution by being patient. Diligence isn't just perseverance immediately. Diligence is understanding when patience actually provides a better opportunity for success, at least for us. Fortunately, we do have an excellent relationship with the West Palm Beach Police Department. And that is not just solely in violent crime, but we have a continuing dialogue. We have members of our office that are on call 24/7. We have those points of contact with our office that also are likewise available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we routinely have conversations, trainings, discussions, case reviews, and investigative meetings on individual cases. I can tell you through my career, I've definitely seen the importance of allowing patience in certain types of criminal investigations and prosecutions. But that is really the hurdle that we look at. We want to make sure that when we charge a case, we're in the best position suited for the time to have a successful prosecution, with always being mindful of the potential threats that exist in the community if we do not file charges. And I can say there are definitely those times where we will file charges on a case that we understand could get stronger solely because we're working hand in hand with the police department and the community to take that violence out of the community immediately, because we know that there will only be more violence if that individual is left uncharged. So it's definitely a continuing level of communication and working together in a partnership that really gets us to the point where we make decisions on filing charges and how successful our prosecutions are. I'm more than happy to answer any questions. I understand that's somewhat of a general overview of just what we do at the State Attorney's Office, but I'm more than happy to assist in any way that I can.
Very briefly, can you repeat that last sentence? You said there are certain circumstances under which you will bring charges, even though it doesn't reach this higher level, if it is necessary to take violence out of the community. Is that what I heard you say?
Not that it doesn't meet a higher level. It will meet our burden of a reasonable likelihood of a successful prosecution. But we understand that there are times that although we may feel more comfortable, if we're given the chance of waiting a little bit longer to file charges and maybe a case getting stronger, our office may have the desire to wait more time and gather some more evidence. But we also always stay mindful of the present risk associated with an individual that's on the street. And
Okay.
that is true. There are times where we have charged an individual that we have not only probable cause, but of course, we meet our legal burden as a state attorney's office. But we do so because we understand that the need to take that individual out of the community. That doesn't mean that it actually equates to the successful prosecution that we may have otherwise had if we waited. And there are times, and I definitely have examples, where we have individuals that then get a lesser sentence because maybe we charged earlier than what we would have desired, but we can also rest assured that during that period of time that that individual was incarcerated, people were not getting violently accosted or murdered. And so there's always that balancing test of, was it the right choice or was it not? Would it be better to have a stronger chance of putting that individual away for a much longer period of time, or was it more important to potentially, realistically, save lives in the immediate present by having that individual incarcerated at this time?
But you are sensitive to the needs of the community.
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm sorry, Chief, are you finished with this presentation, or we can open it up for questions for everyone, or you have some more?
Not just a little bit more.
Sure.
We are sometimes questioned, what are we doing? In addition to some of that the other community outreach parts for the long term. This is just a snapshot of basically self-initiated activity. We served 64 arrests or search warrants last year with the SWAT team. 344 guns were entered into evidence. So there's guns out there, obviously, and we're collecting a lot of them, but there's a lot that we have not collected. This year so far, SWAT served 11 search warrants or arrest warrants, and we've already recovered 102 guns. So, it's not that we are not being active and proactive. There's just a lot of work to do. And the more resources we put into it, this real-time crime center has really made an impact, started to make an impact, but we're not going to see the full results of that until we have time to work through some of the cases that we're working now. So with that, I would like to ask Detective Sergeant Hardiman to come up. He's in charge of our homicide unit. I know he provided some information that's in the packets that you all have regarding the historical on some of the homicides recently, and he's going to give you a little information on that.
Good morning. Sergeant Dennis Hardiman with the West Palm Beach Police Department. I'm assigned to the homicide unit. I've been a member of the police department for 21 years. Over half of that's been working just homicides in the Criminal Investigation Division. I put these packets together with you, obviously to show you what we deal with on a yearly basis. There are pie charts for each year, and if you would notice on the first one is 2016, we had a total of 10 individuals killed within the city. And the biggest struggle that we have is finding a witness to these crimes. As you can see, in 2016, we had 10. We had 5 cases where we had no witnesses at all. We had 1 case where the witness was uncooperative. With the vast amount of video surveillance that is in this city between residential and businesses, a lot of this is captured on video. However, most people don't have high-definition video surveillance systems where we can see exactly who the person is. It might be a car that drives by on a street corner. It's captured on video. You can see that there's plenty of witnesses that saw the shooting. However, nobody wants to come forward to cooperate with the police. And the biggest reason we get is fear of retaliation, because they have to live in these neighborhoods and their kids play outside. And once we document them and it goes through and an arrest is made, their name becomes public record. So eventually the defense finds out this is who the witness is. And, that's their biggest fear for retaliation. We are trying to work on a program, it's called Recap. That's where we're trying to bring more of the community back together. It's rebuilding every city around peace. It's been working, from my knowledge, out in Las Vegas. They want to bring that here. It's more of the community leaders, pastors that would get more involved with the victim's family. A lot of the success that they've had is with the victim's family members to avoid retaliation shootings. As you can see on the media, we've had shootings 8 o'clock at night, 3 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. Obviously, a lot of it is captured on video. Again, the importance is we just don't have the amount of victims. I put this together this morning. So from 2016 to 2019, we've had 70 individuals killed in the city of West Palm Beach in that 4 years. 36%, or 25 of those 70 cases, there is absolutely no witness to the case. And another 20%, or 14 of those cases, is an uncooperative witness. So you're looking at 56% of those homicides in those 4 years. It's either uncooperative witnesses or absolutely no witness. All we can rely on is DNA or video or somebody that we can identify it. We've offered rewards out there in the city. And again, they tell us, my life is not worth $5,000. It's not worth $10,000 to testify in court. And we understand that. Do you have any questions? I'll be more than happy to answer what I can. Going back to with the state attorney, we work hand in hand with the state attorney. I would say out of all the homicides in the city of West Palm Beach, 90%, we know who did the crime. It's the burden of the proof. Without a witness, without somehow to put that person at the scene, pulling the trigger of the gun, that's our problem, is getting past that next hurdle with the state attorney's office. And we do have cases going back as far as 2017 that we've recently presented new evidence to the state attorney, so we're hopeful on those cases of getting more arrest warrants issued. Another big hurdle is the use of social media, okay? That's the biggest tool that we have in our tool belt, but we're at the mercy of all these companies. We're at the mercy of Google. We're at the mercy of Snapchat or AT&T. When we do request media records, Sometimes it can take a month, sometimes it can take 2 months, but a case is never closed until we've made an arrest, or we know exactly who did it, but we can't prosecute the case because they died or something like that. Some reason for us not to be able to prosecute the case. So that in a nutshell, that's our biggest hurdle, is getting cooperation from the public. And we're hoping that once we get this recap off the ground, maybe that will start helping us out.
All right, again, Chief, I'll defer to you. Are you finished with the presentation before we start diving into questions?
Yes, that's all I have for the presentation itself.
All right, commissioners, to set further context, it's one of the things that I pledged to do when I was campaigning, and I did have a conversation with the chief about this, is that every time there was a murder in our city, if I was in town, I would show up at the crime scene. The purpose was obviously not to micromanage any investigation. I'm not a police officer, but it was really to demonstrate to the community, to the family, that there was indeed a mayor who, and excuse my French, who gives a damn. And unfortunately, the first time I had to do this was Saturday night, when I got notice that we had a double homicide in our city. And so I hopped in the car and went down. And I got to tell you, it's not anything I would wish upon any of you. It is not easy when you're confronting family members who have lost a loved one in real time. But it does demonstrate that while these are numbers here, these are human beings. And it's not only the people who have lost their lives, it's the family who have lost a loved one. So, and I will continue to do that, because it adds an element of texture to what we're talking about today. And again, I think it's important for the family members, for the community, to realize that we as elected officials certainly feel their pain. And it was unfortunate. So anyway, I'll open it up to questions from commissioners, and well, I will start off. One, and I understand the hurdles. I understand the difficulties, and with resolving cases. A question I have, and I don't know the answer to it, is how does our community compare with respect to resolution rates of homicides? How do these percentages compare to other like-size cities in our region, and our county, and in our state, our nation? How are we doing?
I mean, I would have to actually pull numbers from the same size as us. I know as the past 2 years, we've been high. In 2016, we only had 10. And if you go back even further, it goes in different waves. But I don't have off the top of my head any statistics to compare us to, say, if Riviera Beach was the same size population, to see what their numbers would be.
Were you asking about clearance rates itself or incidences itself?
Clearance rates.
Okay, because the clearance rates, yeah, I'd like to, as far as the percentages and the clearance rates go, everybody reports to the FBI with uniform crime reporting, but not everybody reports the same way. As we were saying before, we've got cases where other jurisdictions would potentially clear cases that we leave open. So you're not necessarily comparing apples to apples when you look at a clearance rate, because there are some where you'll see that they actually, they may double clear them. Where the FBI is getting ready to go to an incident-based reporting system that's going to be a little bit more detailed on the actual activity, what happened, how did it really get closed, not just checking a box. So the national average is somewhere around 30-35% on clearance rates. But again, it depends on where you're looking to get that rate from.
Commissioner Neary?
Thank you. Thank you, Chief, for your presentation. So Yeah, a bunch of questions, but I'll just ask one because I know my colleagues have questions as well. And that was one of them, really around so that, you know, at least for me, kind of take the emotion out of it and really look at the data and how we're closing cases as compared to other municipalities. So that's one that I hope maybe in the future we can get more information on. I just think it's really important. Chief, if you were to, you know, top three, I think every department is constantly self-evaluating themselves and saying, hey, here are the things that we need. Knowing that we're in starting phase 2 of the data analytics and the technology portion. You spoke a little bit about the need around bandwidth and that we're to single digits in terms of our openings. But if you could just, you know, the top 3 needs that you're seeing, knowing that we're going to always have crime. So I think we all, at least for me, I'm going to speak for myself on this, you know, as hard as it is, I understand that it is, there's a burden on our police department, as there should be. There's a burden on the community, as there should be. There should be a burden on the bad actors. So I want to make sure that we're highlighting all of these groups when it comes to this. But because we're here today and we're talking with you, Chief, what are you seeing as the top 3 things that the department needs?
I think the top thing is to be able to really leverage the technology that we are putting in place right now to make sure that it's staffed appropriately, that it's in the right locations to be the most useful for all of us. But in addition to that, the staffing levels on the road could be better. In order to have proactive teams that you can kind of attach to that real-time crime center, you have to have some more bodies. The thing is we're still tasked with the safety of the entire community, right. not just the 3 neighborhoods that have historically high levels of crime. We always have more resources in those areas, but we can't let the rest of the city suffer not having an officer available to respond if something happens there. We are tasked with balancing everything from homeless issues to homicides. So more bodies is always going to help. But to be able to use those bodies to help leverage that technology is huge. Third piece is more community involvement with our police officers on the front end to really get a hold of what is causing these crimes to occur. There's a whole lot of different things that play into that. I know Kevin Jones, I see him sitting in the back. He works tirelessly to get to the root of some of these problems. Yet we have crime problems because we got socioeconomic disparity in this city that is much larger than probably any other city in the county. So we're dealing with some of the wealthiest people and some of the poorest people, some of the most educated and some of the least educated, employed, underemployed, unemployed. There's a lot of things that the police department is tasked with addressing. And at the end of the day, the police department is here for law enforcement. But we're doing social services work. You know, we're being mentors to kids. Mentoring isn't typically your piece of law enforcement. That's not going out and arresting bad guys. But it plays into the whole community picture. Our officers are very engaged in what's going on in their communities. They know the different issues in the areas that they serve. More bodies with more buy-in and more community support, and support from the administration also. This is not just a police department. It's a city. The whole city has to be involved in this. You know, we get called for trash on the side of the road. Last time I checked, that wasn't necessarily the police department's job. But they'll go out, and then they'll get code enforcement, and then they'll work on getting sanitation. So we all work together. If everybody's working together, we're going to be that much more impactful. But at the end of the day, we're the ones running around carrying the guns, having to do the tough stuff. But we're also tasked with doing the things that other parts and other departments in the city could help us with. So, you know, we tend to always be the ones that have to kind of direct traffic in regard to what the community is looking for. So, you know, that technology, personnel, and support.
Commissioner Peduzzi.
I hear you, and I hear that that there's a whole bunch of areas that the police department is involved in, and I think we're doing a really good job of engaging our youth. I think the Police Explorer program, the different youth programs that we have certainly are going to go very far in preventing crimes in the future. But right now we have this extreme problem that we've got, this hot area of homicides that I think maybe there needs to be a reallocation of resources. Maybe we have to put some of those feel-good, happy things on hold until we have enough personnel to be able to do both. Because bottom line, if we could prevent some of those homicides today, right now, I think that's probably what we need to be doing. I do agree we need to focus on the future also, and I commend the department for the work it's doing with our youth. But maybe a reallocation of resources is what's needed, and we're going to have to look at additional staffing. I mean, you probably do need more personnel, but how about looking at maybe reallocating? And I hear, some people with law enforcement backgrounds are saying, hey, we just need to saturate the area for a brief period of time, maybe even. I'm not really an expert in law enforcement. Yeah, I was a former law enforcement officer, but I was a weekend warrior, so I'm not necessarily an expert. But how about that? How about, reallocation of some resources and saturate, and just until we at least knock that problem maybe off its track, you know what I'm saying? I don't know if that's something that could be utilized or something that you'd be willing to try.
Like I said, is that third prong there is support and getting some direction. We're trying to put out fires all the time, and we're trying to cover all the bases. We certainly can pull some of our community response people. But then I need help with fielding the calls from the community that said, where's my officer? That I usually can call and talk about community problems. So you can pull one string and put them in another spot, and it can make an impact. That's how we used to do it back in the 90s. That's how, but again, policing has changed over the years too. And there's whether you want to admit it or not, the Ferguson effect, that comes into play when you're asking officers to do things. The way we policed when I started in '95 is not how we police now.
And that's the policing I probably am familiar with.
And but that doesn't mean that saturation isn't going to work. But again, you got to get some feedback from the communities where you're doing the saturation. Because some community members don't want a standing army in their community. So I'm more than open to any suggestions that come out as this is not an independent conversation. This is not one-dimensional police work. This is a community police department. So, we can focus on one particular neighborhood, but at the same time, you have to be aware that you got, 150 other neighborhoods that are now not real happy that you're only focusing on one. So we try to spread it out. We do put extra resources in the areas where we know we have a higher crime rate. We do that. And if we have a spike somewhere else that's not normally busy, we send more resources there. The problem is you're talking about 3 historically high crime-ridden areas that we have always put the most resources there, and it hasn't knocked it out in 125 years. So I'm more than open to suggestions, and I'm more than open to taking more resources to help address it. I mean, there used to be federal dollars when we had weed and seed come in. We did things like that. You can weed it out, but you got to have a back end to it because it will just grow right back. Right. So it's stopping it today is important, but stopping it long term, in my opinion, is more important.
If I could follow up, Mayor.
Yeah.
I see that it looks like the trend is that our homicide rate is increasing. Now, I mean, thank God we've got a trauma center right there at St. Mary's, and usually it's pretty close to the northwest neighborhoods. People can get to the trauma center pretty quickly. So I think that number would even be higher if we didn't have the resources right here in our community to ultimately prevent some of those deaths. I'm talking to some of the constituents in the northwest neighborhoods, and what they're telling me is that they don't see a lot of police visible. Now, I understand that there could be undercover operations, and that's great if there are, but I've heard that one of the things people say is they don't seem to be doing the community policing in our neighborhoods. We don't see the officers walking the beat. We don't see them, engaging as much as we think they could or should maybe. And I don't know if what I'm hearing is accurate, but that's what I'm hearing is they don't feel like there's enough visibility of officers in their neighborhoods. And that goes to what I was saying before. Maybe if we do a brief period of time of a saturation or something where maybe we knock it off of its tracks where...
Right. Well, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. There's a difference between just putting bodies there and putting bodies there that are doing work. Just sticking a uniform in a community is not necessarily going to be... We've had incidences where somebody will come in a car 3 seconds after a policeman walks by and commit a crime. Part of the problem is, and with the spike in homicides, is the number of guns out on the street in general, period, not just in the city, and high-powered rifles. You know, you might survive a wound from a smaller gun, but when you get hit by a rifle round, your chances are not so good unless you do make it to St. Mary's. So it's the devastation of the injuries has increased with the availability of firearms in the neighborhoods. So, I mean, there's always more resources. We can put resources everywhere, but again, it's a push and a pull. You have X number of bodies. You have X number of technology. You have X number of hours in the day. I'm more than open to redistributing the way that we do things. And again, it's very different today than it was in '95, than it was in 2005. But we have great officers that have been there through all the ups and downs since then. And are more than willing to work at things, but the priorities have to be laid out citywide. It's not just us independently thinking this is what we want to do.
I know, Officer, you had something you want to say.
Yes, I just wanted to support...
You can speak in the mic, please.
I just wanted to support both your question and her answer. She's talking long-term for the community, and you're talking current. I want you to understand, it's your real allocation suggestion is more of like a intermediate between the two. I do want to give the mayor and you the answer that we currently are running both teams in response to this. So the short term is actually being answered, and I know they may not see us, but one of the reasons and why I feel strongly that we prevented what we did is the known associates to the victim, the primary victim of the double homicide, those were being surveilled, and we found them and encountered them. So they may not see it immediately, but we have to use those unmarked capabilities in order to prevent that secondary. Because as she said, just throwing people at it isn't necessarily going to stop the violent offenders. It may make some people feel comfortable, but it's actually not going to hit the core problem. So I want you guys to be confident that there is something being done immediately after that fact, and I think you guys are talking more intermediate time frame, which I think is great, but I want everybody to know and have the confidence that we are taking action immediately after by supporting it and throwing as many bodies as we can that have the capabilities and the abilities to address it. So.
Mayor, if I could just follow up real quick.
Well, let me get around to some of the other commissioners, because I know I want to make sure we spread it. Commissioner Schoaf?
Thank you, Mayor.
Hold that thought. Write it down so you don't
I got
forget.
it.
Yeah, okay.
I think what's important in this conversation, the chief hit the nail on the head and said there's just a lot of work to be done. And there is some responsibility from the police force, responsibility from the community, but also responsibility from the leadership on this dais. And I would encourage you to get your feet out on the street, look the problem in the face, see what the community is facing, go on a peace walk, see what's happening from their perspective. I've walked peace walks with officers where sophomores in high school say, I know you were in my classroom. They're recognizing officers, they're building up trust with the community. Go on a ride along. The most eye-opening thing you can do is get in the front seat of the car with an officer where you go from looking in an illegal parking to stay in the car, don't get out. You know, it really opens your eyes to what the situation is. And I think as you start to look at where everyone stands, it's also important to take and say, how do we put a statistic to a crime not committed? How do we put a value on a life not lost? So when we're doing all this community building, we have officers out making contact, making sure 7-year-olds don't turn into 17-year-old shooters. How do you put a statistic to that? There's not something neat and clean that's provided. So as we look at budgeting, I think it's important for us to take a look, and Chief this will lead into my question of saying, I know staff, technology, and support are your top three. Are there other things like gun buybacks, more narcotics investigations, more investigators in general, a social media staff monitoring person, something that's more specific that can help really affect that crime not committed rate?
I still think we're still not going to be able to quantify it, but yes, the staffing is very important. And the technical staffing, civilian staffing, IT-based, to make sure that the systems we have in place are working and doing what they're supposed to do. More investigators, yes. We have people that are assigned to task forces at multiple different agencies, state and local agencies, that work together with other detectives simply because there's so much work to do in a certain type of crime. Take computer crimes, porn. There's so much out there, and child endangerment, human trafficking, all these things that you don't even see that we're throwing resources at also. The problem is that we are so busy that we're just putting a little bit of water on each fire. And if there's one particular thing that we want to do a little bit better at, we certainly need to throw more resources at it. It's trying to manage the whole gamut and what is the most important thing that you want us to work on, because then you can be more regimented and direct on what resources do you need for that problem. But even the homicide rate, we're talking about these three neighborhoods, but are we talking about the guy that shoots his neighbor and says it's self-defense, or the murder-suicide that occurs between a domestic partner out west where you don't ever have anything happening? These aren't just happening, incidences aren't just happening in those three neighborhoods. There's other things that don't get any kind of playtime at all, but we're dealing with those too. So, any agency would take more bodies to help do the work, especially if you've got competent people doing it. And that can kind of help us direct where you want the resources to go. But I do know our community engagement efforts, our community policing unit gets more positive feedback than anything else that we do. We're never going to hear a, hey, congratulations, you got the murder guy. We get, why did the murder happen? So you have to give some positive feedback to the officers sometimes too, so that they know that they're doing something that's making a difference. It's frustrating. We're as frustrated as everybody else that sees a violent crime happen, because we certainly don't want it happening on our watch.
Commissioner, Madam President.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief, and thank you to you all for being here and presenting. I appreciate it. I don't think that you'd find a bigger advocate than myself on this dais of supporting systemic programs and really trying to get to the root of this. Because of my education background, we worked with 3- and 4-year-olds to help influence graduation rates. So I commend the city for our efforts, the Mayor's Village Initiative, for the community policing, for the peace walks. I do see those things taking effect, and I'm appreciative of what we're doing and glad to take a part in it. So I think there's the systemic approach that we're taking. I think that what all of us commissioners approved last week, the strategic solutions that we're taking with the cameras, I think that we could do more of those approaches. I think you've outlined some of that, Chief. I guess my question is what I'm hearing you talk a lot about is the balance of all of these activities and where in the city do we allocate resources. Do you feel like you have a clear direction from administration, from the dais, from the commissioners on the direction to go and where to allocate those resources? Or
there hasn't been a lot of dialogue about it. Obviously, violent crimes is going to be everybody's number one. But no, as far as having direction, you have to understand the whole scope of what we're doing before we redirect it. So, there's always room, and that's why it's a great opportunity to have a workshop like this, to be able to have that discussion and get the direction. Because if we're doing something that's completely out in left field, then why aren't we having a conversation about it and trying to get us back into center field? So, there's plenty of room for improvement always. You know, and like I said, is we're not a one-dimensional police department. We're doing a lot of different things all the time. If we're wasting our time somewhere, or the administration feels that we should be doing a little bit less here and a little bit more there, the feedback is needed.
Thank you.
Commissioner Rouse?
I think this question is for Sergeant Matias.
Yes, sir.
It appears that your bailiwick is predictive crime prevention, correct? Your intelligence, your CID, so Central Intelligence Division. You
Yes.
do more of
We work
that
with
kind
you
of
there.
work,
Yes, sir.
right? So have you identified a demographic of the perpetrators and/or victims that are being, that we find in these records?
It's approached from more of, we have long-term and then we have short-term. I wouldn't say that we have specifically looked at the demographic portion of it. I would have to turn that over to more on the analytics side for them to go with us. What we try and do is we try and more influence, as Commissioner stated, the hot topic and the flare-up that's coming. So it's less of potentially a specific group, it's more of what the hot topic is. Unfortunately, those topics change daily, weekly, monthly, so that's what we're trying to get ahead of as opposed to the demographic portion of it. We direct our resources that we have, our needs, towards the specific areas that we think are going to flare up. The intelligence side that's coming through from the added crime center has been huge. We haven't addressed it, but a huge impact was made in what's bringing us here today, the double homicide, based on that crime center and based on all the technology that we added. There was a huge impact to it, but we can't discuss that today. But people need to be confident in that it's playing a role.
Because,
May I?
go ahead.
Lieutenant Hagan, West Palm Beach Police Department Criminal Investigations. More directly to your question there is, how are we addressing some of these? We know these players, and we've got long-term investigations working out on them. But as we monitor social media, as we monitor what's going on, we're daily redirecting our TAC team. Sergeant Matias and I are on phone daily, redirecting where his teams are working, because we know there's a hotspot popping up. We know there's an issue popping up, and he's the sharp edge of the knife. Right. He's going after that to try to stop that. And these things change daily. The long-term investigations we continue to move forward with. But to try to target the individuals as they're popping up, we've got two TAC teams that are working very hard to try to do that.
Mayor, can I repeat?
Yes, sir. Yeah, sure.
Well, I'm I'm born and raised here, and I'm sad to say that there are far too many people that I knew or know, their families, on this list. And without me sitting here and calculating the numbers, I can tell you that the demographic that we're talking about are African-American males 18 to 45. Mm-hmm. Okay? Would you all agree with that?
Yes, sir.
All right. And as I look at the composition of everybody here today, how many African-American detectives do you have in the detective division?
I can't speak for that. I do want to support your statement of here. One thing I left out about me is I went to Belvedere Elementary, I went to Coniston Middle School, I went to Twin Lakes, and graduated from Palm Beach Lakes. I have a vested interest in this city as well. My mother-in-law still lives in this city. My parents have moved away to another state. My children were partially raised in this city. I was born, me, my wife, my son, and my daughter were all born in this city. So I support your statement. I want you to understand I have a very vested interest in it, and I think that's one of the reasons why I was put into this position. As far as the demographic, I don't have the answer for that.
I have one black detective.
Aaron Sam?
Can you speak in the mic, please?
Yes, I have Detective Sam, who works for me on the homicide unit. As far as inside the entire investigations unit, including Detective Sam, I think there may be only two.
That's Sergeant McIntosh.
Oh, and Detective McDaniels, Lewis. 4 or 5.
Okay. So do you all think that that could be a problem with the lack of ability to find witnesses and the uncooperative witnesses? And I realize that you have I'm not going to get shot for 5,000, or I'm not going to get shot to help somebody go to jail. I understand that phenomenon. But do you think that having some African American officers in the detective division would assist in being able to stop some of this?
It may. Unfortunately, the process, when we need new detectives, we put applications out. It's an application, they fill it out to come upstairs, there's a list. Unfortunately, people see how much work goes into it, they don't want to do it.
And that's precisely the next question, because from my experience, I've had cases with the city of West Palm Beach. That's kind of been the process, or the way that detective division has worked for 20, 30 years, is that you don't get any extra pay, you get extra work when you go to the detective division, am I right?
Mm-hmm. It's 100%. There's no incentive to become a detective. The only incentive is you have that phone 24 hours a day, and they're calling you all day long.
And so some good officers that could be great detectives don't want to do it because of that reality.
Absolutely, because you work either 4 days, 10-hour days, or you work 5 days, 8-hour days. In patrol, you work 4 days on, you're off for 4 days. You never have to think about this place for 4 days until you come back to work. Where in Detective Bureau, it's not like that. And we are understaffed in Detective Bureau.
Okay. Commissioner Baduzzi, I know you had a follow-up.
Just to follow up, actually, with what Commissioner Riles was talking about. Yes, it's true that when you have a detective come into the Detective Bureau, you're potentially on call all the time. But those detectives are also receiving overtime for the work that they put in after their normal hours, correct?
Mm-hmm. If they have to stay late, yes. Or if they get called in on a weekend, yes.
So not that this is any motivation, but they are compensated for, the work that they're doing, the extra hours they're putting in. It's not like they're being asked to put those hours in free of compensation or as like a salaried employee.
Correct.
Commissioner Schoaf?
Thank you, Mayor. Just following this conversation as well, I've been out on the street with patrol detectives, et cetera, lots of ranks from the police force. And Chief, from some of the things that you're talking about, I'm understanding with part of community policing is that those feet on the street is what's intelligence gathering. So would it be fair to say that any number of a diverse population of the employees of the police department are information and intelligence gathering from relationships they've established and then reporting back up to detectives?
Yes, and that's a good point. When we talk about the demographics of the different pieces of the department, overall we've got a little bit over 16% black police officers. Our community policing, I think, is probably 50% black officers because they want to be out in the community. They want to be the boots on the ground in the neighborhoods that we're talking about. And they help the detectives. It's not that they're writing the cases, but they're the ones, I told that story earlier, when I'm seeing the same guy on a corner day in and day out and day in and day out, and I know that guy. The detectives don't necessarily know everybody that's on the corners. They're going to go to the people that are working in the street and go, hey, you ever seen this guy, or do you know this person? So from the detective standpoint, I don't know. Yeah, we would like the whole department to be perfectly a mirror image of what the city looks like, but we're just not there. We've improved the numbers a little bit, but I will tell you the most impactful minority employees that we have are the ones that want to be in the community, that want to be out talking to people, they want to be getting the backside information and feeding it up to the detectives, rather than necessarily being the ones that are writing all these cases up. And they're very, very good at it. They're very good at it, and they get a lot of information, and they talk to the community members, and so it's, there's kind of a push and a pull there. It's a good balance, but I think that the communities we're talking about, we do have a lot of minority officers working in those communities, and nobody works independent of each other. At the end of the day, everybody's got to come together with the information in order to have a team effort on solving these cases.
Commissioner Neary?
Thank you, Mayor. I think we all can agree that there is not a singular answer to this issue, but one of the things that you said, Chief, and it struck me, and it's also as a native son of West Palm Beach, that not much has changed, right? And specifically in the areas, I know we haven't called them out, but we all know some of the areas that when you refer to the 3 neighborhoods, not much has changed. And so what it says to me, again, not being an expert, not having the answers, is we need to figure out and not do the same thing, you know? And so if that is a double down on, I can't think of a problem today, just in business in general, in which technology and data analytics aren't involved. And I'm happy that we have moved to that, and we want to continue that. Again, I think we're on phase 2. We want to kind of continue that. But something else that you mentioned, Chief, and I think it is not the elephant in the room, but it's just the reality of the day. There are systemic issues. There are economic inequalities that we're dealing with today that go back generations. And nothing stops a bullet like an opportunity. And I think part of this discussion, and again, I know we could be here all day, but part of this discussion is about, in terms of strategy, it may very well be planting a tree that we don't intend to sit under, because you're going to have your short, intermediate, and long term. I, too, want to make sure that we're inclusive of the long term. How do we really move that needle? And again, I know for the topic today, which is, you know, the homicide clear rates, but as you can see, we're all over the table, because this is a meaty issue and not a singular solution to it. So I don't know that there's a question, but I just want to be kind of overstated in that, because I think it's so important, and I don't want to lose sight of, yes, the short term, which is how do we close these cases, the intermediate actions that we're taking, and the long term. I mean, for one, I don't want to see us go away even for a month with the GREAT program, or with some of the programs that we're doing, you know, in the elementary schools, because you know what I believe that's about? That's planting that tree that I won't get the credit for, that no one on this commission will get the credit for, but another commission and another administration will get the credit for it, so to speak. But a lot of priorities, and it's kind of figuring out which ones. So again, no question, but just a statement regarding that.
Madam President.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, the one thing that I heard us all repeat throughout this presentation is that it's very complex, and that there are a lot of competing priorities and a lot of different issues that we're trying to prioritize. So, Chief, I heard you mention code enforcement, and I've seen that on the peace walks, riding through the neighborhoods. Jobs, hope. I saw John Ward was here earlier from the CRA talking about what are we doing for development, supporting our schools. And then the last one that I wanted to bring up was supporting neighborhood associations in these areas that might typically not be the folks who are getting together and collaborating, but some of them came to the North End workshop a few weeks ago. So I guess my point here and my question is to Mayor and to my fellow commissioners, should we also be holding our other departments to a higher standard of helping us to achieve these same results, of monitoring our neighborhoods, of ensuring that everything is working seamlessly to help the police, you know, with these goals and strategies that you've outlined today?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's all hands on deck. We are here because we are trying to build a better city, and that's one reason why I launched the Neighborhoods Initiative, because I do want to hear from the people with feet on the street who are living there, and also as you all are out and about in your districts and other parts of the city, so that we can make sure that we are holding other departments accountable to help us to make these communities as the best communities that we possibly can throughout the city. Commissioner Peduzzi, and then Commissioner
Thank you,
Riles.
Mayor. I'm hearing what my colleagues are saying, and I am a believer in crime prevention, obviously, we need to set the tone for the future, and we need to make sure that future generation, you know, is taken care of so that they see that they have opportunities and alternatives to crime. But with all due respect to my colleagues, using an analogy in the fire service, we have a raging fire going on right now in our city, okay? And in the fire service, when there's a raging fire going on, you put the fire out. It's all hands on deck, as the mayor said, and you put that fire out. Crime prevention, going and doing inspections of offices are put secondary. You put the fire out because it's a raging fire and people are going to die if you don't put the fire out. And in the city right now, we've got a raging fire in terms of the number of deaths we have. These are people. You know, these names here, you know, we can do something that'll affect the city in a year from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now. But these people also deserve justice. And I'm less concerned with a homicide clearance rate. I'm really more concerned with what can we do to diffuse the situation immediately so that there's not another mother crying on the street corner next Friday night. And I'm going to try to be out there too with the mayor. I was just a little unsure of the logistics of a commissioner coming out also. But I want to show that we care, and we do care, but this is a raging fire. We need to put the fire out. We also need to look to the future, but that may require more resources. But it still doesn't mean we got it. We got to put the attention where it's most needed right now. That's all I have to say.
Mayor.
Let me ask a question. Chief, has there been any thought, and this builds upon the fire theme, to forming, and I know when there are other types of crimes, there are task force that are put together, whether it's prostitution stings or drug stings, whatever. Has there been any thought to putting together or organizing even multi-jurisdictional, some kind of violent crime task force? I know the violence doesn't just stop in West Palm Beach and it covers other municipalities. Has there been any thought to working with other municipalities on putting together something like that to put out this fire?
We have a violent crimes task force that is run through the sheriff's office that has members from just about every jurisdiction in the county involved in it. So anytime that there's an incident like we had Saturday night, our task force officers meet with those task force officers and they discuss the intelligence, connecting the dots and whatnot. Because like I said, this is not just an isolated location that this is happening. And as Sergeant Hardiman said, 90% of the time, we know exactly who's involved in it. So do the other members of the task force. So our goal typically is to go directly to where we think is going to be the next problem. So we are involved in a task force in regard to that. We do share intelligence. Okay. We do share the information, and it is all hands on deck in regard to coordinating with other agencies and jurisdictions that have similar issues.
All right, thank you. And by the way, I do appreciate, and it does not go unnoticed, the fact that you felt that you were able to avert even further escalation, because as I was talking to some of the officers Saturday night, that was a concern that I had, is that this incident appeared to be a retaliation for something, and I didn't want the retaliation to generate further retaliation, and clearly steps were taken in that regard. So I appreciate those efforts. Commissioner Riles and then Commissioner Neary.
I just wanted to say to you all that I realize that you all have a very difficult job, and many times it's a thankless job, and I commend you for doing it and for the public service that you provide. I would likewise say that I have noticed in these little 56 years I've been on Earth that sometimes organizations get stale and need to change the way that they operate. I don't know if that's the case in the city of West Palm Beach, but you articulated that the way the detective branch has operated. I thought it was crazy when I took a deposition back in 1990 that officers who chose to become detectives and who had gone and gotten that extra schooling weren't paid a little more. And so perhaps we need to look at all of the things that we can do in order to try to change this this nationwide problem. It's not just here in West Palm Beach, but it is a problem that will ruin the quality of life for every citizen in West Palm Beach. And if we're going to have tourism, we certainly don't want this on the news every week, and we got to do something, and we are all in this together.
Commissioner?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So I just want, and I think we all can agree on this. Commissioner brings up a good point about putting the fire out. I think we all want that. You know, I was on this commission in 2015 when I believe that summer we had 30-plus homicides, or was 2014 perhaps? 15. So it's not new to me. And again, much like Commissioner Rouse, as I go through, these aren't just names. I know their fathers and family. So I want to just be overstated about that, but I appreciate the analogy of putting out the fire, because I do agree with that. I think it's important too that we be focused on this. So if close rates is not clear rates, excuse me, the clear rates, maybe, obviously that's really important. But if the issue at this moment in time is something different, Chief, you said you received this on Friday?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so you've
the
prepared
request,
the request on Friday, so you've prepared. So is this a thorough presentation? Could you have given a different presentation had you had another week to prepare for it?
It depends on what the questions are. I mean, like you said, we've been all over the map this morning in regard to the topic. I mean, the topic is broader than just one type of crime in the city. It's an overall effort. Yes, the homicide. We happen to have 2 homicides on Saturday after this request was made on Friday. So, we have extensive amounts of data on lots of different things. So it's just dependent on.
Right. And I'm only speaking as 1/5 of the commission, not an administration, just as Commissioner Corey Neary. Seems to me clarity and a focus is the next step on this, whatever that is. But again, and I don't speak for anyone else other than myself when I say that, but I think that's going to be super, super important, and that we're all coming at this, from the standpoint of wanting it. We want it to be better. I mean, there's no doubt, including the men and women who are in uniform, here today. I have no doubt about that. But to Commissioner Rao's point, maybe it is an opportunity to do some reset and think differently about some things. I think we've heard great suggestions, whether it be some of the work that Kevin Jones is doing, the Peace Walk, and getting out there and meeting folks where they are. So all of those things. But the enduring understanding for me is clarity and a focus about what the next steps are.
Can I just add to that also?
Speak to the mic, please.
I'm sorry. We look at the closure rate, okay? What we're trying to do is build a solid case. And there's cases that we have right now in Old Northwood, okay? I know 3 people are involved. I can arrest 1 today and close the case, but I want to arrest all 3. So if I arrest the 1, everything goes out in the media, the entire copy of the PC, so everybody knows who the other 2 suspects are. And then when we're done. We can't build that case anymore because those people are either going to never talk to us or they will eventually. So there are several cases that we know we can arrest them today, but there's more than one person involved in all of these homicides. It's not just one person. You may have a driver and 2 passengers. Your driver, you may arrest him for something different, and he's your only witness. But is he part of the crime? Yes, he's part of the murder also. So there's a lot of different steps that we weigh out. That's why I don't want to get hung up on just, we closed 30% or 37% or however it is. It's the total picture is we're here for these people that died. We're here to speak for them. We have done saturations. Homicide is opportunistic. So we could saturate from Banyan to Tamron, Banyan to Palm Beach Lakes, from Tamron to Dixie Highway. We could saturate that for the next month. Nothing's going to happen. It's going to go to, when they leave that area, they're going to be driving, the car's going to see them, they're going to get behind them, and it's going to happen on Northwood, or it's going to happen on the 4400 block of Broadway. It's not like they know he hangs out on this corner every day at this time, we're just going to drive by, because nobody has that type of schedule out there on the streets. It's a crime of opportunity. We see it at shootings at the nightclubs. We see it broad daylight driving down Broadway where one car is shooting at another car. I agree with the let's throw everything at it and saturate it, but we're not helping it. We're helping those people for a month, but what do you do after that month? That's the biggest question I think we have to answer.
Well, okay. But at some point, something has to be done. Enough is enough. Now, another concern I have, and it's not for today, but it is a concern, is, and I think they are related, is the fact that in these neighborhoods, there's an active drug market. And one of the things I fail to understand, and another pledge is, I don't want to have in my city any open-air drug markets in any of my neighborhoods. We'll get to that at some point, that discussion, but the two are related. I'm sure that, I'm not a detective, but I intuitively believe that a lot of the murders and homicides that have happened in our city over these past few years are related directly or indirectly to the drug market and in those particular communities. And so that's something else we have to come to grips with as communities, law enforcement, administration. I refuse to believe that it is acceptable in this city to have open-air drug markets in any neighborhood. But that's another topic for another day. Commissioner Schoaf.
Thank you, Mayor. I know we're at a police presentation, but this put out the fire analogy, I think is something that we've all started to look at. And I think, you know, as we look at the issue that we have in front of us, no good fire chief is going to send 50 firefighters in one fire truck to a problem. So I definitely think we need to look at where that fire is and take a look at it, but also be cautious of the secondary fires that would go on. Because while this may be the raging fire in the front, we also have secondary fires, as Chief alluded to, all over the city. You know, the City of West Palm Beach Police Department services the entire city. And so while your resources are focused here, you still have to be mindful of what else is happening and what secondary fires, what backdrafts may occur. And so I think certainly addressing the burning issue is at hand, but how do we address it smartly? And something has to be done. I think we're all here, and I think, you know, Commissioner Nearing is saying what I would agree with, and saying it sounds like focus is what we need to help provide our police force with. You know, they're tasked with a lot of things, and so the more we, as a commission, the mayor, as head of administration, can help focus those efforts and then mindfully address one problem at a time, I think that would certainly be helpful. So, thank you.
Madam President.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree completely with my commissioner's points about staying on focus. And the comment I was going to make is, it seems like we are doing this, and this would be the area that I would want to focus on, is on the leading indicators instead of the trailing indicators, right? We would be fine with whatever the close rate would be if we had lower incidents, right? And what can we do to affect those lower incidents? I think it was Sergeant Hardiman, you mentioned the program called RECAP, where you're working with community leaders to help influence more participation as testimony to the witnesses to the crimes. I would love more information on that, maybe at another time, and anything else that we're doing to affect those leading indicators, to help solve these, to prevent them, to reduce the opportunity.
Commissioner Baduzzi.
And just so everyone's aware, I requested these stats from the department a week or two ago, a couple weeks ago, and Chief Mooney was very quick in providing it, and thank you. And I think you provided even more than I asked for, which is good, because I said if there was additional information other than our homicide clearance rates that would help us understand the issue. But when I put this issue on this agenda, or asked that it be put on this agenda, I was really more concerned with addressing the violence in the community than the homicide clearance rates. I mean, it was on there, but that's my thing right now. And what I wanted to ask the detective is what we're doing now working? Or do we need to, as Commissioner Riles said, maybe relook at it and say, maybe we need to change our approach a little bit? Is what we're doing now working to prevent homicides?
To prevent homicides?
Prevent these killings from happening, primarily in that area that we've been talking about.
I'll let Tony.
I'll answer that more because that's more of my focus. I can tell you, in 22 years being here, the statistics are, it's a unique situation we have. When I started, the violent crime, it was just nonstop from beginning to end. In your shift, you're going violent crime to violent crime to violent crime. It's extremely unique now because one number has somewhat stayed the same nationally, which is the homicide rate. Everything else is dropping, violent crime-wise. So to answer your question directly, I do think the progress we've made in the last year, adding the technology and the reallocations, adding the street teams, it's definitely going in that direction, that we're getting ahead of it. The focus from the commissioner's office, the mayor's office, will definitely help as far as for the chief for reallocation in the moderate, intermediate times. I do think we're getting ahead of it. I think by everybody coming together and communicating their expectations, their wants, their needs, we're definitely going to continue in that path of getting ahead of it. As I said, the technology and our teams being out there has allowed to get ahead of several shootings. I think it's only getting better by now with the communication, though. I definitely feel that way. It's extremely unique, and going back to the demographics, his detectives will be able to come in there. They won't talk to them. We have gang detectives and us. We'll come in, and they'll talk to us. And it's almost unique. It has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with gender. It has nothing. It's just they see us out there. So sometimes they feel comfortable talking to us, and we're not community-oriented officers. We're the ones out there arresting them, but for some reason it forms a bond when they see us. The families might not be happy with us, with what happened, but those individuals that are either retaliating or victims, they communicate with us. So I do think, yes, we are going in the right direction. The communication between the commissioner's office and the police department is only going to help strengthen that and get us going further in that direction.
All right.
One other thing I'd share, statistics are moving all over the place, but in the very short time that we've had ShotSpotter up and running and been responding with TAC teams that are going out and directing this violent crime very quickly, while that overall number of an ag assault that you're understanding from a UCR code, an ag assault is somebody pointing a gun at somebody. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter whether they fire the gun, whether they point it at him, or whether somebody's hit. It still goes into this number of an ag assault. Well, right now, we're significantly down on the times that people are pulling the trigger from where we were a year ago.
Great. Thank you. Very briefly.
Yep. ShotSpotter obviously is reactive. I'm talking more about proactivity. ShotSpotter could be proactive in the future, I agree, but in the near term, it's more reactive. And I would just suggest that, you know, if I go back to those constituents in the communities where the violence is occurring and tell them, hey, the police department says we're doing everything that we can do. Just be patient. It's gonna, you know, it's all gonna work itself out. That's not gonna fly in those neighborhoods. We got to do something that's more visible and more proactive, in my opinion. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chief. I want to thank you particularly for putting together on such short notice, and I apologize you did get such short notice this presentation. I was a little bit concerned when I only saw one item on the agenda, but I'm glad we only had one item on the agenda. This has been a very robust, healthy conversation, and thank you, gentlemen, also for taking time out of your very busy schedules. Commissioners, thank you for engaging, and I will just say, because I want to tee it up, I do want to have a workshop on the drug trade in certain of these neighborhoods. So I'm putting you on alert now, Chief. At some point, we want to schedule that because that is something I think that deserves a similarly robust conversation and engagement from the people on the dais. So, commissioners, unless you have something just burning and urgent, I would like to declare this meeting adjourned, and thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.